Hi, it's Alex from Backyard Grannies. Today we're talking all things granny flat finance with Brooke from Home Alone Finance. Welcome, Brooke.
Thanks, Alex.
So a lot of our customers ask us, how do you finance a granny flat, or what are the options?
Yeah, so there's three main options that we look to fund a build for a granny flat. So the first one is cash. And I understand that not everyone is in a position where they're going to have the cash to be able to build a granny flat. But this is a scenario where we see this when we may have an elderly parent that has sold their home and they want to be able to build something on their children's property. And that enables the family to live together on the one block of land, be close to each other for care. The next option is refinancing your loan. So if you've got a property, particularly if you've had it for, maybe 5 years plus, you may have a little bit of equity in your property. So for example, your house might be worth $850,000 and you've got a mortgage on it of, $400,000. There's potentially enough equity in the property to be able to borrow the full amount to finance a build. Now, there's pros and cons with that. So some banks won't allow you to just pull out the full amount for a whole construction in one go. And you also do need to be able to demonstrate that you can afford the additional money that you're borrowing without taking into account any, prospective rental income for the granny flat. And on the flip side of that, they also don't consider that in the value of the property. And there's a couple of banks that allow you to do that. And some that do it better than others. So we can help with that as well. And the third option is probably the most common option. So we do this a lot. So you can get a construction loan to build a granny flat. So the benefit of a construction loan is that you are paying for just the funds that you're using throughout the build. So as you know, there's probably 7 stages to construction, and the builder's paid at each stage of that. So with a construction loan, that loan's progressively drawn as the build gets closer to completion. For the customer, it's also really great because it allows them to potentially borrow if they don't have the equity or borrowing capacity, just as it is with their current home. So, for example, we can actually get the house and granny flat valued as if it were built. So a valuer will go out, they'll have a look at the existing property, they'll have a look at your plans and contract from Backyard Grannies, and then give us a value as to what they think that's worth when it's complete. For investors, there's also a really good perk that if that is an investment property and you're going to be renting out the granny flat once it's complete, we can also take into account prospective rental income. So that will also help the client afford or demonstrate affordability for the extra money that they're borrowing.
I guess one of the things we do come up against, we have some customers that may not be able to have the money to actually start the process, which is like the design and approval process. So for people that don't have the cash up front to get things started before they get to the contract stage, what are the options available for people in that situation?
That's a really great point. So there's a few ways if you don't have the cash available. So we can potentially look at increasing the existing home loan to cover those upfront costs. So that way it's covered at the start of the build and before you get into that construction period. There's also short-term finance options, which they're not ideal and they often do come at a higher rate. However, that can be a quick solution that potentially, if the eligibility is there, you may be able to then refinance that in with your construction loan.
A big thing for us, we have a lot of property investors. You yourself are a property investor and currently building granny flat with us.
I am.
Could you just give us, I guess, your take on why granny flats are such a great investment opportunity?
Yeah, and from experience, I can probably speak on this a lot. So I think one of the most obvious reasons is that they have such a good rental yield. So in Newcastle, you purchase a property, you're likely getting under 4% rental yield, whereas a granny flat, you can get somewhere between 10 to 15% on that. In my scenario, and also for clients that I've helped out, it also helps with a little bit of a balance between, purchasing an investment with really good yield, because often when you are purchasing something with strong yield, you're compromising a little bit on the capital growth. So this strategy, in my position, especially, so it enables us to buy something that is still in an area with high capital growth, but it helps with the overall yield of the property. So in my example, I would say with the cost of the build plus all the, anything that's not included in the contract, we're looking at less than $250,000 turnkey. That property would be able to be rented somewhere between $550 and $650 a week for a relatively low investment for that money. So it makes a lot of sense financially for us to do that, and it also means that we can hang on to that property for a lot longer and just see the value go up over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like the type of return that you're talking about there is something that we see a lot as well. So we obviously see people like on average across sort of the Newcastle and Central Coast area probably getting on average about $550 a week return. I don't know how many customers you have come through or that you've worked with, but those returns are definitely pretty typical for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a demand for rental at the moment as well. I think last time I looked, Newcastle was sitting at 1.2% rental vacancy. So there's certainly demand for it. The yield's there, and it's also helping to add more housing to the area, which is, a really big need at the moment.
Yeah. When it comes to the finance side of things, obviously we build for families as well. So there's a lot of grannies out there that need a house, and it's not just grannies, but yeah, for that intergenerational living and that side of things, there is a lot of demand. Is there any difference, I guess, between loans for families and loans for investors?
That's a really good question. So the financing is nearly identical. The only difference is that if it is built for a family member, then we won't consider rental income for that property because it's not an investment where it is generating income. Other than that, we can still look at the various finance options we discussed, such as your construction loan, using the value when the property is complete, and then also looking at refinancing and taking cash out to be able to do that as well.
One question that comes to mind, a lot of people, when they go to think finance, they quite often just say, okay, we're going to go and speak to our bank. Why speak to a broker?
It's a really great question, and something I often will have, new clients that, potentially they've only spoke to their bank or they've only banked with their bank for such a long time. And the beauty of speaking to a broker is we have access to typically 30 plus lenders, and you find every bank has a different policy, particularly with construction and granny flats. So whilst you might not fit the policy to be able to build a granny flat with your bank, there'll be plenty of banks out there that we can consider that may have a solution. So I think it's not just about finding the right bank that has a policy, but it also gives us options to see who's competitive. So potentially saving you money through that process as well.
From your side of things and from like your customers, like, is there any questions maybe that you'd have, I guess, back to us or like to someone like myself as a builder and someone that's specialised doing this for a long time that, it might be helpful? Or
Yeah, for sure. So I would always have a look to see, do these companies, have they got displays? That's a really good way to be able to go out, see the quality of their work. How many houses are they building? That's a really good indicator of, a strong established company. Things like Google reviews, looking at their website, are they credible? So they're all really important questions to ask. So like, for example, how many granny flats would you build a year, Alex?
Yeah, so somewhere between 120 to 150 granny flats a year.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and look, that was something that, made me interested in building with Backyard Grannies, is because I'd actually help clients finance construction using your company as their builders, but also I knew that you've been in Newcastle a long time. You do seem to build a high volume of properties. So I had a little bit of trust in the company before even speaking to you and the team.
Thanks very much, Brooke. Really appreciate your insights today and coming on to talk about all things granny flat finance.
Thanks, Alex.